this particular movement of Black Lives Matter is that it can be really easy for people to go, well, I'm not part of the police, I don't kill black people, I don't stamp on someone's neck. But what are the ways in which we feed into the structure that exists that disadvantages black communities so severely?
Hi guys, welcome to Bigger Than the Hustle podcast, where I bring you real conversations with entrepreneurs on how they live their lives outside their business. Every week we deep dive into the energies, the thinking, the habits, the disciplines, and the mindsets that make them successful in their life, which allows them to be successful in their business. Now today I've got a guest with me. Her name is Leyla. Her line of work is very relevant today in the way the world is sort of shaping up today. So I'm not going to sort of go into it too much because I'm sure she'll introduce herself a lot better than I can. So without further ado, hi Leyla.
Hi Bhavik, thanks so much for having me on the podcast today.
Not at all. So I'm going to hand the mic over to you. If you could sort of introduce yourself in your words, and then we can take the conversation from there.
Fab. So I'm Leyla and I run a business called diverseminds that I started running full time, and it was a side hustle, which we can talk about, Bhavik, before that, and from October 2017. And I create happy, equal and mentally healthy workplaces through coaching, training, consultancy. And there are two bits that I focus on in my work. One is mental health and well-being, and the other is about race, culture and equity. I also coach people one-to-one, particularly Black, Asian, global majority, people of color professionals who want to tackle their work-life balance challenges so they can spend time guilt-free and stress-free and doing the things that they love. Perfect.
So a lot of things came up there. Now, what's quite interesting is the relevance of this conversation today, you know, with the Black Lives Matter movement. And I know since that's happened, and things like this in the world happen all the time, but this seems to have sort of really mushroomed a response from the world, which is great because there's so many things that have been sort of brushed under the carpet, the things, unsaid things, that the way people live their lives. Now, if you can give sort of a little bit of an insight to the way you think about this and the importance to what you do and how you can sort of push the conversation forward, especially within the Asian community, because I think it's important.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point. So I've been thinking a lot actually about anti-blackness in Asian communities. So, you know, particularly my mum, she's always called out anti-blackness. She is a real kind of champion of equality and people behaving properly and people not doing what we see in the South Asian community quite a lot. But I suppose if I go to the first part of your question, which is, what does this mean to me and how do I integrate this into my work? I sort of feel that racism has always been a strand that's run throughout my life. And again, that will vary for different South Asian communities, people from different backgrounds where they've grown up, and your generation. And again, it's interesting because my mum said she didn't feel any racism in the 70s in the UK, which I think is fascinating. Yeah, I felt racism in the UK in the 90s all the time. So that sort of piqued my interest, and it was always there. And then when I went into working in a career and I worked at the University of Oxford on race, religion and belief, just the racism was appalling. So it's not BNP placard holding, but the stuff around the systems, which is why I think is interesting with I say interesting, but this particular movement of Black Lives Matter is that it can be really easy for people to go, well, I'm not part of the police, I don't kill black people, I don't stamp on someone's neck. But what are the ways in which we feed into the structure that exists that disadvantages black communities so severely? And also other communities as well. But there's a particular hatred and there's a particular vitriol, I feel, towards black people, and we all have a responsibility to challenge that and equalize the system. Because what really is the purpose of upholding and denying racism? I don't think there's any purpose. It's difficult, but we need to have those conversations in order to make things better for everyone. And actually, you know, who do systems serve? Even if we look at the 9 to 5, working 9 to 5 as a system that served people, Victoriana probably before, that had a family at home, traditionally a woman and kids, and they would go out to work, they would have their lunch in a pub, they would go back to work, come home at 5 o'clock and dinner would be ready for them. Actually, the 9 to 5 system doesn't really serve people in the same way anymore, very few people actually. So that's why we have to think about this holistically. And I always try and talk about race and culture, even when I've spoken about mental health, because often when people talk about mental health and diagnosis, but even positive workplace practices, it does often come from a Eurocentric white perspective, and therapies come from, Jung and Freud. But actually, if we think about the rich plurality of the different cultures from Latin America, South America, the whole continent of Africa, India, China, which could be a continent in and of itself, Korea, North Korea, South Korea, Japan, we have very different systems of thinking. So that kind of therapy and that kind of perspective doesn't always heal us. And so I think we have to keep talking about it to understand. And there's a very famous author and anti-racist scholar, Ibram X. Kendi, and he says it's not good enough to say I'm not racist. You have to be anti-racist. And it's also something that Angela Davis said, and I totally agree with that. And if we don't keep talking about this, and it also, he says, it goes on. It goes more. It's not just about love and education. Yeah, fine, but if we really want to change things, we have to fundamentally look at systems, change systems, set standards, expect more of ourselves, and not take the status quo anymore. And that's really kind of, maybe I don't say it as radically as that when I'm delivering to corporates, but that is essentially what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, I think the two key facets that jumped out at me from the little introduction you gave is racism or diversity and mental health. Two things which I think are huge topics, huge things that we all need to be speaking about more, especially mental health within. I heard a statistic, you'll probably know this better. The suicide rate amongst young Asian men within the UK being sort of one highest in proportion to the community. And that shocked me a lot because I was a part of that. I still like to see myself as a little bit young, but I'm sort of more middle-aged now, I suppose. But I get it, in terms of the information that's being thrown at young people these days, whether their young minds are ready for it. I've always said I was allowed to grow up organically. What I mean by that is we were allowed to make mistakes, and we only had a few people around us. We had a little bit of information in terms of TV and conversations, and then we were allowed to fall down, stand up, fall down, stand up. I'm sure it's similar to you as well, and therefore our brains grew at an organic rate as opposed to the super steroid growth of fertilizer that the kids have these days. And I'm glad that we sort of grew up in that. Now, for your parents, now this is another conversation I'd like to just jump into right now, is you said about your mum. Did you say that she did or she didn't experience racism in the 70s?
She didn't. She said in UK, she didn't. She personally didn't feel that she experienced racism. She knew it was there, but she never felt that she did. But then she also said maybe I just saw things differently. But she would always call out anti-black negativity in her own community. So she saw that aspect of it, but she personally never felt racism directed towards her in the 70s as an Asian woman.
And it's funny because my dad, very similar to your mum, said exactly the same thing. When he came over in 68, and then sort of, went from city to city like a lot of people did. And he says he never experienced racism overtly, maybe subtly, but never someone in your face saying this is how it was. And he said maybe because he's always been quite a positive mindset. He's always seen things in the grass is greener in terms of that sort of mindset. And maybe sometimes when you have that, and it's like similar to myself, I heard that you said that you probably experienced racism, whether that be overt or covert. And for me, growing up, I don't know whether it was because we were sheltered, whether it because we lived in Leicester or what it was, where the majority of it's Asian people. I never really experienced it overtly where it's in my face. Maybe whether I was just me being ignorant, maybe I was being sheltered by my parents and never really shown or brought to those conversations. But never, even when I went to university, I was one of the only Asian people in my year at Leeds University. And again, there were a few covert things, but nothing that made me feel that I was different. Now, if you can jump into some of the things that you maybe experienced, which gave you the thinking that you have today, and that's probably led to that side hustle becoming a main hustle to the business that you're in today, so that you can try and change the conversation. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think for me I've always felt like an inside outsider as well. So even in the Asian community, I didn't grow up with my extended family. I don't,
Hmm.
you know, I don't really know them that well. Like
Hmm.
recently, one of my aunts passed away, and it is really difficult because I haven't seen her for years, and so yeah, I didn't, and it's yeah, so it's like I don't feel wholly what people would expect Dearsy
Yeah.
Girl to be like, and I definitely don't fit in with mainstream what I would say English white culture. And I think I always felt like that. I always felt like an outsider because I had the pressure to. It was interesting that you were saying that you felt that you were able to make mistakes and get up again. And I think in terms of social media, yes, that's different now. But I feel like in terms of my family, there was a lot of pressure on me to do right, to always be top student, to always do this, and I couldn't always do that. And I tried really hard, and I'm lucky. I loved school and I loved being academic, but I didn't feel there was much margin for error because I think there was that mentality of there's only space for one person to be really amazing, and if you're not really amazing, it's going to be really bad. Your future's going to be really bleak because of this kind of sense of you've got to be better because you are brown.
Mm.
And so I think it was so school. I've always been bullied at school, so that was one of the things. Racial bullying, being excluded, that was a really big thing. So I'd find out that people had had parties or that people had met up at the weekend and I'd not been invited. Again, thank God we didn't have social media because it would have made it 10 times worse. So that's why I'm really passionate about including people, because I know very raw, and actually even talk about it now, you think, oh, who cares? But it still hurts, to think, why was I excluded? So that, that's an interesting one, the kind of emotions it brings up in me. Yeah, just sort of being made to feel really othered. What else? I think it's the subtle things. Teachers having assumptions about your abilities, about how good, like you're really good at maths, but you're not good at English. That's not necessarily true. Yeah, I suppose that I could have had it a lot worse. I was really lucky with a lot of teachers I had, and like I said, I was very fortunate. And then I went on to sixth form in a different, in Cambridge, and that was a whole different ball game. I felt like I could breathe. I felt like it was really different. There were lots of people who were children of academics who travelled around the country. There were far more Asian people, because I think I was one of 5 or 6 Asian people in a school of 1,000. There weren't many of us, and maybe 3 black girls all across the years. Whereas
Mm.
Cambridge was much different. It was just a massive sixth form with 2 years, and everyone was brilliant.
Yeah.
So I guess again it's knowing, isn't it, that when you face tough times, and I often look back now, and this maybe sounds a bit macabre, but I do think to myself, I'm amazed I didn't self-harm. I'm amazed I didn't, because it was very, very lonely. But
Mm.
I guess when you know that you've done that, you know that, and even now with COVID and everything going on, and isolating. I'm an extreme extrovert. So one of my friends said to me, "This must be hell for you." I said to her, I think it was like week 4, I said, "No, I'm doing okay." And then week 5, I did dip a bit. But I think that's the thing, is when I've struggled with having to isolate or not see people or not live my life in the way that I want to, I A, think about how lucky I am generally, and B, think about this is not the worst time in my life by a long stretch. So actually, it's okay. And
Mm.
I'm not really one of these people that's like, oh, I'm so grateful for the awful things that happened, because I'm not really, but it does help you, doesn't it? It does give you
Yeah.
that resilience to think
Yeah.
about, well, you know what, you've done worse before and you got through it, so you can do it again.
And you mentioned something there when you were at, school, college, etc., always feeling a little bit, not part of any real sort of community or group within that. Do you think your coping mechanism in those days was to shut it out and ignore it, or was to face it and actually accept that this is how it is and I'm going to move my life forward? Because we do get quite a few young people listening to this, and I'm sure a lot of them will resonate with what you said in terms of not feeling a part of any sort of real group, or feeling like maybe I'm on my own here, constantly. Even though you may have people around you, it's not really somewhere where you feel connected, or you feel I fit in here. Which way did you deal with that, looking back now in hindsight? Maybe you didn't realize it was happening at that point, but in hindsight, how did you deal with that, and how has that helped you today?
I think I probably oscillated between the two things that you said. Yeah. And I think 2 things that really helped me was, one was music. So I was a massive indie girl, actually,
Mhm.
which has nothing to do with kind of cross-cultural music. And I just listened to a lot of music. I would listen to music endlessly.
Yeah.
And I think that was one thing that really helped me. The other thing was reading. So I remember Mary J. Blige was really big when I was growing up.
Yeah.
Erica Badu was really big when I was growing up. So reading their stories, Missy Elliott, I adore Missy Elliott. Lenny Kravitz's story is really fascinating. So all
Mm.
sort of a lot of musicians' stories. I used to subscribe, but it doesn't exist anymore. There was it was like a leaflet, you know, in the days where you had to order things on post and write letters
Yeah,
to people
yeah,
to bring back to you, called No Pass Around, and that was a leaflet about anti-racism, how you can get involved in anti-racism. So I think that's how I tried to do it. You know, fanzines, finding spaces where people were talking about things, which did shift towards the end of the 90s.
mm.
And there was obviously there was like a lot going on, wasn't there, at Brick Lane when it was predominantly Bangladeshi and Bengali,
Yeah.
and the kind of drum and bass scene, and people were talking about mixed race relationships and mixed race marriages and mixed race kind of fusion of music. And I think that is what kind of got me through it, that maybe I don't have people around me, but there are people going through the same experience, even if they're not close to me.
Mm. And with the, you know, you'll probably remember this in terms of when you were interested in something, you did like something, it was so much harder to be into it because you had to work so much harder. So what I mean by that, you like music, you had to go and get a CD from a shop.
Yeah.
Or you wanted to read something, a lot of time you had to go and buy a book. It wasn't an online order. You had to go to a library or find it from a library, right? So because there was so much more friction involved in actually being into something, I think you appreciate it and you got into it even more because you know it's so much more work. Now it's just a press a button, isn't it?
Yeah.
Or
Yeah.
I like this week. You know, I like, you know, blue cardigans this week. Let me be into blue cardigans now. And I think there's positives and negatives on both sides. I think it's positive that the plethora of information allows us to be exposed to so many new things that maybe we never would have been exposed to because of our communities, our cultures, and our limited, you know, viewpoints of the people around us. But I think the positive was because there wasn't so much, we could enjoy it more because we had more time to enjoy it and we had more time to be into it as well, whether that be on our own or whether that be with people. And otherwise, it was brilliant that we could, you know, have these small, like used to have a friend and he was into maths, you know, similar to why we both used to do that together. And and we were, you know, when you had the geek corner, so I was part of the geek corner. I loved it, but I always felt that my parents and my dad, when we got a school report, it'd always say Bavik's very disruptive. He does all his work, he answers all his questions, gets it right, but it's very disruptive. And I said to my dad, why do you think that is? Because it's all boring. Like, they're not telling me anything new, right? Now I know schooling tries to be a bit more progressive in terms of, you know, giving new work for people that are trying to sort of progress. But in those days, it was just disruptive. And my dad didn't want us to be disruptive. He just wanted to be quiet, you know, toe the line. The teacher's always right. Don't question them. And now I think that's changed, and I'm so glad about that. Now, do you know, with the conversations sort of flipping back to racism again, if we have within our own families, okay, there's certain, you know, being part of an Asian family, there's always sometimes that someone may say something in jest, in banter, and it actually isn't all right. They may not mean it in that, so the intention is not to be racist or to be nationalist or whatever way it is, but it still comes out. So which way do you think we can approach that without getting too confrontational, but where you can make a point, and to show that this is the line in the sand, this is, you know, I'm not willing to accept that anymore.
Yeah, and the other point about that is that racist language sounds different in different languages.
Yes.
So if you're speaking Gujarati or Hindi or Punjabi or Urdu, it does mean terrible things as it does in English, but it has a different nuance. So how, again, we receive that information, we might feel the impact is lessened than if someone were to say it in English. So I think it's one is to check your own reaction about that. Actually, what do these words really mean in whichever language they're being spoken in? And just to say to people, so I put a video up on my personal Facebook yesterday that actually my mum had sent to me, and it was a video of a mixed race couple. It was an Asian guy and a black British woman. She had Ghanaian heritage, and just how much backlash initially that she had faced wanting, you know, being together from his mum. And at the end, they said in the video, it is difficult, but just to try and say to someone, where did these ideas come from? Where did these perceptions about black people come from? And they said when they asked her that question, she was like, oh, actually, I really have no idea. And the thing is, often it comes from, I know there's a caste system, so in certain religions there's caste system,
Yeah.
and even if it's different religions, that caste system has been often absorbed from the cultural values. So there's always stuff to do with caste and skin color and colorism and shadism. I think we need to, I think it might be easier to start the conversation about that. But I also think it's to think about, well, why, you know, why are we pitted against each other? This is all a legacy of colonialism, but that could go over some people's head. But to ask the question, you know, where does this come from? Why are we using these words?
Yeah.
Why are we describing people like this? Actually, this word, if we translate it, it's pretty bad. Should we be using this word? What if people call us the P word? How does that make us feel? So why are we then using this language about other people? Because you also do have to respect the hierarchy. You can't speak inappropriately to elders. I understand that. It can be really difficult to challenge elders. Or just to say gently, you know what, I don't want to use that word. When I'm here, can we not use that word? Let's use a different word. Yeah, because I think language is really powerful, and if we change the words we use, it doesn't happen overnight, but it starts maybe to shift the mindset, and people will stop using their negative language.
I think that's a really good way when you ask a question about it, as opposed to saying I don't like this overtly, because I think that puts up straight away some kind of barrier or resistance, because it seems like then an attack, doesn't it? But when it's a question, it's a bit of curiosity and a bit of intrigue as to why. And I'm sure a lot of the time the answer is I don't know, because it might be so deep ingrained within upbringing, you know, being raised in a different country. You know, I know, like with my parents, they were raised in sort of like India and Africa and Kenya. And a lot of the black people were workers, were laborers. They'd work within the family, and they were, although they were a part of the family, they were still seen as, you know, the workers and laborers. And I'm sure there's a lot of subconscious bias that comes in because of that, because they were never seen as equal, because they were, you know, within that realm, within that home. And that obviously has changed, but unless you unpick it yourself and understand subconsciously, this is how I think, being aware is obviously always the first step to any change. And then once you're aware, you can make conscious moves to, you know, adapt to a new way of thinking, or a way that you feel more comfortable with. And with that generation, even like knowing my dad is probably the most open person, and someone that's always pushed the boundaries, always tried to do something in a different way. But there are certain things, and I'm so glad that I can have conversations with him openly, and he doesn't get, you know, there is a little bit of resistance, but he's open to listening now. And it's nice to be surrounded by, you know, family and community that are open. Because I know not a lot of people listening, it's not like that. And I'm not sure what it is around you as well. But for me, especially, all the elders are like equal to us. And they will listen to us, you know, openly, in terms of they'll hear the words we're saying and not say, you're younger, what do you know? It's like this podcast that my dad listens to all of them. And even though there's certain conversations, at certain times I swear, he doesn't like me swearing as well. And he says, if you can cut that out, it's fine. But he goes, everything you talked about, I'm so proud that you're even discussing these things, because it takes a certain mindset. And I said, Dad, this comes from you, though. You've always pushed the boundaries, and that's all I've ever seen. So I don't know any other way, right? So your upbringing, Leyla, in your upbringing, how has that moved you to be in the line of service that you give to the world today?
I think it's almost what I call the inner rebellion. So what do I mean by the inner rebellion? It's kind of, it's interesting what you were saying about school and the reports that you were disruptive. So the teachers used to say in secondary school, particularly chemistry, I loved chemistry, and I could talk, and I would actually be talking because I'd be helping other people. I would get like top marks, but the teacher was like, she's always talking, I don't know what to do, but clearly it is going in. And I used to get moved in French, but I loved French. I was really good at French. It wasn't because I was bored, it's because I love talking to people. But it is funny. So that inner rebellion, and what do I mean by that, is things that I could get away with that I could push back against in an acceptable way, so that I didn't have to conform to expectations.
Mm.
I can't really say if I can put my finger on what those expectations were. I think they were about you will be really good at school, you will be really good at school. There wasn't, my background's different in the sense that it wasn't really talked about marriage. I wasn't betrothed to anyone. You know, these stereotypes drive me up the wall because that's not my story. I know it's a lot of other people's story, not my story. But it was always about I will not, you know, I never wanted to have children. I never wanted to be a mum. I was not going to do that because I saw, maybe not directly, but women in my family, actually my cousins, out of choice, this was completely their choice. Many of them married young, far younger than their mothers. I don't know why.
Mm.
And then sort of I just thought, well, what was the point of having a private school education if you're just, and I didn't have a private school education, but what was the point if you're just going to go and have kids? It really irked me. So I think I have this thing that I push back against, and you know, I've got to work on my judgment around it, about being strong, because I feel like that I didn't really have many role models. I didn't, you know, I've got this thing about being a strong woman, about being a strong brown woman, and I've got to be strong, and being strong to me means doing something really well, speaking out. So I think there's a lot about, I was always told growing up, you've got to be sweet and gentle, and I reflect on that, and it really irks me. And I think I know what my mum was trying to say, but I think a better way of saying it would have been be kind and calm. But again, it's a choice, because I think that goes across all genders. Like be sweet and gentle feels very directed at girls, and I often think, I say, Mum, if you had a boy, would you have said that? And she said, yeah, I would. But yeah, I think it's more about saying be kind and calm. Take a deep breath, be kind to people, be calm. And I think that is what she was trying to say. So for me, that was like, no, I'm not going to be sweet and gentle. I'm going to be outspoken. I'm going to be loud. I'm going to be, and anyone who knows me knows I speak my mind. In fact, my friends have a joke. They call me Leyla Outrageous. I have two modes, outrageous and Leyla Outrageous. So yeah, and I guess part of that is about shaking up systems and not accepting the status quo. And that's why I started my own business. I couldn't handle workplace politics anymore. I just couldn't handle it. And there's only so much that you can be a tempered radical, where you can be a radical in a kind of container, a free radical. Going back to the chemistry analogy,
Yeah.
but I couldn't do it. I just thought, you know what? Even if it's a risk, even if I just make £1,000 a month, I don't care. I've just got to do this. So I think that's how it's led me to do what I do, and being able to speak my mind. And if someone doesn't want to work with me, they don't have to hire me again. But I don't kind of feel at people's behest in the same way.
I think something you just said there really resonated with me about politics in organizations. When I finished my, so I went to Leeds University and I did a degree there, and I came back to Leicester and I did I did a master's just purely to keep my dad off my back because I didn't want to get a job. So I said, oh, let me keep him off my back for another year. So I did that and then finished that, and I went to London for 6 months to work. I was working in this satellite organization. I really enjoyed it. I enjoyed the people. I enjoyed the work. I enjoyed everything, but I hated the politics and the ability of someone just because they knew other people to get ahead, and other people who were working really hard just being suppressed because they never spoke up. And that thing really irked me. And that last 6 months within the organization, that's it. I said, that's it. I'm just going to go on my own and start my own business. This was like 22, 23 years old. Because I thought, if this is how the workplace is going to be the whole time, I don't want to be a part of that. I want to be a part of somewhere where if you work hard, you progress. And if you don't, you get pushed back, and that's it, you know? And it was that simple thing that has led me to, 20 years on, still doing exactly the same in terms of looking for new opportunities for myself and trying to raise people around me and bring people in that I can see there's a lot of, there's so much goodness within them that they're being held down by the organizations that they're in, just because they're not outspoken, just because they're not loud, just because they take it, just because of their nature. And I wanted to always be, let's bring these in and try and not look after them, but try and give them an equal, footing in their life and their communities. Now, so that was one thing. The thing you when you were talking was, when you do go into organizations and you do give sort of like your talks or your workshops and things like this, rewind 5 years to now, how do you think things have changed? I know now a lot of organizations approach you because obviously the rhetoric has changed, the ethics has changed with a lot of organizations, whether that's been forced, whether that's because they've wanted to. to say even just 5 years ago when things, even the conversations were completely different. What are you seeing now in terms of the approaches of organizations to the people in the world out there?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really great question, because some part of me feels that has there really been much change? And having worked in this field for sort of 16, 17 years, sometimes I despair. But I suppose recently, in the last 4 months, okay, so 5 years ago, I think the positives on the mental health and well-being side,
Yeah.
that's really exploded, and I think people are much more willing to talk about it. And also I feel there's been a shift around proactive approaches as well. So there can be a lot of knee-jerk reactions, but I think there's a lot more proactive planning. Let's talk about well-being. Let's think about the apps. Let's think about the good stuff people can do if people become unwell. What can we do? Let's upskill managers. That's really changed. A lot of appetite and thirst to train managers and people up in the right way to have these conversations. On the race equality side, I feel like in the last 4 months, there's been much more about white majority cultures wanting to understand what white privilege is, what white fragility is, what white defensiveness is, understanding more about white savior complex. I feel also that we're having more of this conversation about South Asian anti-blackness, which I think wasn't really talked about very much at all. I feel that maybe organizations are starting to realize they do need to put money towards this. So I know when lockdown happened, I had lots of calls from people saying, oh, budgets have gone. And I was expecting that. And then to have a call 3 months later, oh, actually, budgets are back on now. So there is money there, isn't there?
Yeah.
And I think it's how that's distributed.
Yeah.
So, yes, I think I still feel like, though, we're still in our infancy talking about this. And people need to know their history. We've got the kings and the queens, but we've also got all this social history. How racism came about. There's that famous story, isn't there, about the black trumpeter who worked for Henry VIII, and there's a letter that he'd written to Henry VIII for a pay rise, and actually black communities, black people were in Britain A and B. They weren't treated. There's a lot of theory around they were seen as much more equal citizens then than they were as time went on, and with colonialism and then slavery and everything else. But also that the black story doesn't start with slavery. It starts with kingdoms, it starts with gold, it starts with trade, it starts with supporting communities. So I feel that there's suddenly the pennies dropping very, very slowly. But now, for me, the question is the longevity of that and how long it's going to last. So progress on mental health, dipping in peaks and troughs with race and race equity, and understanding the complexities of that. And then, we're having lots of conversations now about should we use the term BAME. It's used a lot of medical terminology with research, but is it right? Do we want people of colour? But in a lot of generations in the UK don't like people of colour. They prefer black with a capital B. Younger black communities don't like black with a capital B because they don't feel people like us really belong in that category. I get why. But yeah, so I think we've still got a long way to go, but at least people are starting to use the R word, to talk about race, to talk about communities of color, to talk about that cultural capacity.
And another thing with race and racism, I've got friends out in Poland, and an interesting viewpoint they have, because they're all white from different European countries, so like French and Spanish and things, and a lot of the girls are Polish, and a lot of their viewpoint is the word racism sometimes is misinterpreted for nationalism. So they're very proud of their country. They don't want their country to change so much in terms of new people coming in and trying to change the fabric of what they believe, which I get. I understand that, right? But then to say that I'm racist because I believe that my country should remain with the same ethical, standpoint and viewpoint, where's the actual line of that? Because that's a bit I struggle to understand in terms of when someone believes they're superior because of their skin color, or when someone just believes that I like being British because British values stand like this for me. At what point does it become racist?
Well, that's a really great question. I'm sure a lot of scholars would have different opinions on that. And I guess it's about, you can be proud of your nation and proud of your culture, but you could also welcome people in and support them in being included in your culture. And I suppose nationalism is a bit of a dirty word these days, isn't it? And I get why, and I've got lots of friends who are anti-nationalist, and I totally get why. And I think the problem with nationalism is it is that exclusionary thing, isn't it? That we are proud and you have to fit in with us, and there's only certain places, and there's only this, and there's only that. But if you look throughout history, migration is a really natural part. Everyone's migrated, everyone's moved around. If you look at the history of Cheddar Gorge Man, for example, when they found, and again, that kind of pushback around, oh, this is a liberal elite thing. It's like, actually, it's science. They've done carbon dating. So I think, yeah, you can absolutely be proud of who you are in your country, but I also think, why do you feel that people coming outside of it will ruin that identity, will change things? And things might change, but things always change. I don't think they ever stay still. So I think it's about the hostility, the hatred, the lack of understanding, and also the fear around losing your own culture. If you're strong and proud of that, why does it matter if other people come in? But I'm sure other people wouldn't see it that way. And I haven't been to Poland. I've got a lot of Polish friends, but I've never been there. But it's a bit simplistic for me to say that. But I don't see why it has to be so exclusionary.
And the interesting thing is when, especially within Britain and within the makeup of this community that we live in, when people speak about being British and being British, but if you go back far enough, there isn't actually any British, is there? There's so many different communities that came, the Vikings, the Saxons, the Anglo-Saxons, etc., came in, and then other communities from different parts of the world. So if you go back far enough, there actually isn't a basis, is there? It's all immigrant communities from the start, right? Same with America as well, all sort of immigrant from the start.
Well, actually, Native American communities are the original.
The original. That's right.
But actually, everyone else is an immigrant, and there are a handful of Native Americans left, really, if you consider the whole population of the USA. Same with Native Canadian, First Nations, Canadian people, Aboriginal communities.
Again, something I'd like to jump back to, which just sort of sprung to mind just now. You're talking about strength. You deal with a lot of ways in a strong way, in terms of sort of like your ability to decipher information and use that to counter argument maybe, or just give information, or make enlighten someone with a point of view they may not have experienced, right? And that comes from strength, because you have a belief in yourself and your own ability. How do you deal with vulnerability when you feel in a vulnerable position?
That's a great question, because again, some feedback I've had is you need to show more vulnerability, and I don't, and that's the thing, because actually I'm really emotional. Like I'll cry at a drop of a hat, and I don't want to be like that. And so this is why I try and put this shield on. How do I deal with vulnerability? I guess there's two, like vulnerability publicly and vulnerability privately. So they're people that I'm really happy to be vulnerable around, like support groups and my family and stuff. But publicly I really struggle with that. And there are lots of mental health campaigners that talk about their lived experience, and I just couldn't do that, because I don't want people to know. So I do have, I guess, that there is a bit of an Asian culture around, you don't talk about what goes on inside the house outside the house. I feel that's quite a strong element of definitely my background anyway, and so I still struggle with that. And I kind of push back against feeling vulnerable. I really hate it. I really hate feeling like that, which isn't particularly healthy. And there's, I'm a big fan of Brené Brown or the power of vulnerability stuff. But how do you actually do that? So, vulnerability, if I've made a mistake or done something wrong, I'm happy to deal with that and put my hand up. But when it comes to emotions or displaying things or showing that I'm struggling, I'm not good at that. So I don't deal with it very well.
Where do you think that comes from? Have you ever unpicked it? Have you ever unpicked that?
Yeah, I think it's just because I felt weak for a lot of my life, and I felt like I didn't have a voice, and I felt like I didn't have control over things. So whether it was, whether I could go to a party or, do something, really small things. And so for me, I think it is about that control. I don't want to control other people, but just having that control over how I plan things. I'm really structured. I really like to plan. I'm not spontaneous. Spontaneity freaks me out. Let's do this. What? No, we can't do that. I've got to be in the house. I really don't deal with it very well at all.
It's not on my Google Calendar. It's not on my Google Calendar. It's not there.
Color-coded. Google Calendar, color-coded. It's not on there. I say, can you send me a calendar invite? I can't do it otherwise. So I think it comes from that kind of control, wanting control, not having felt weak for a long time, not feeling I had a voice. Yeah.
Okay. And flipping the coin the other side, what inspires you today?
Mm. I think it is about, it goes back to something you said actually about workplaces and how you see people who work really hard but they don't get anywhere. And what inspires me is to ask questions and support people to be where they need to be, whether it means leaving, whether it means staying, whether it means having a difficult conversation with their boss, whether it means doing things differently. I think that's what inspires me in working with communities of colour, and to ensure that they know how talented they are, to harness their cultural capability, and also for us all to have conversations about not just mental health and not just, people often say with self-care, but to really think about, well, your job is to keep yourself alive in a way. Like we can't always do that because things happen, but your job is, if you're really important, if you don't look after yourself, who's going to do it for you? And we need you, and you're really important. So yeah, I think that's what inspires me, and to also see the steps that people take. So people feel dire, they feel stuck, and then you might have a session with them, or they'll be in a webinar, and then I'll get a LinkedIn message from them saying, oh, that was brilliant, I've now been able to have this difficult conversation, and I managed to work part-time, or I've managed to get my adjustments, my workplace adjustments, I've managed, yeah. So I think it's those small tangible changes that inspire me and keep me going.
Yeah. And with, I know you don't have kids, but there's a lot of parents that listen to this as well. And raising kids is minefield. Yeah, I'll tell you this, you'll know my daughter's 14, my son is 9. And they're sort of now past the initial stages where they're sort of developing their own now viewpoints, and they'll openly vocalize what they believe and what they feel now, especially with Versha, because she can be as harsh as they can. I'm the pacifier a lot in this household. So sort of moving forward, for people with young children, we I don't know if it's because of the way we were raised, but we weren't parented at all, really, I'd say. My dad worked a lot and he had a shop, and I only knew my dad after 14 or 15, really. Even though we lived together, we never really saw him as we grew up. My mum was the mother, never worked. She always was, the homemaker at home, and, the traditional family setup in those days. Okay, now, I decided that as my son grew up, I'm going to spend more time trying to, be around with him and my daughter, and in trying to spend more time with them, even though I probably got it wrong and I've worked too much as well, but that's my back anyway. Do you think now, from the people you see or the people around you, do you think we overparent now in terms of trying to think too much for them? Because if I ever went to my mum and said to her, "Mum, I'm bored," she goes like, "What are you telling me for?" That, like, and what? Go and do something then. That was the answer. But now it's almost like, I'm bored. Okay, there's a Lego, there's a jigsaw. Shall we do some coloring? And it's almost like we're thinking for them. And at what point do they then have their own ability to think for themselves? Say, actually, mum and dad are not going to give me a response. Let me try and work something out myself, right? And then the balance of mental health in all that, because actually, by being ignored or by being put in a situation where you have to deal with something, does that give us strength, or does that give us vulnerability there where we're dealing with stuff as we grow up? In that balance, I don't know if you deal with that at all, but is there any inputs that you can give from what you know?
Yeah, I mean, I'm always hesitant to say anything as a non-parent.
Yeah.
I guess it would also really depend on the child. So, if you've got a child with specific learning differences, cognitive impairments, kind of maybe they've been bullied and they're recovering, there might be things you have to do more than you would with a child without disabilities, or they're not struggling if they haven't been bullied. So I think it really depends. I think maybe people overparent. I guess there is a little less, I feel like, in the atmosphere, if you like, when I see my friends, and there is a little less of tough love, isn't there? Like, I remember that, I'm bored. Well, what on earth are you bored for? Like seriously, I've never said I'm bored. How could you say you're bored and then you go find something to do? Yeah, whether you, I don't know. I guess again, social media and technology play a role into that, and how adults' attention spans are really short. So I can only imagine what social media, phones, and iPads do for young people's attention spans. whether you ask your child, what is it that you want to achieve today, and again, that's not about putting pressure. I know there's a lot about helicopter parenting, and that's an interesting one, because helicopter parenting from different cultures looks different as well, and how certain cultures need what's called helicopter parent, i.e. really worry about their child because of racism and because of race issues, whereas other parents are more about pushing their child forward. So they're different things. Yeah, this is a really tricky question. I guess I'm not really sure. I know that I have noticed things around manners, that maybe young people and children don't get told off as much as we were, or don't get told not to interrupt. Like, I have noticed when some children interrupt, it's like, oh yes, in a conversation. And I'm not saying you should shut your child down, but it is interesting. It's more of a case of, Mum, I will answer that question. Just give me 2 minutes and I'll come back to you. There's less of that. There's less. I think there are fewer boundaries. So maybe it's about thinking about, what are the boundaries? Why are boundaries important? Because kids love to push boundaries, but if you're really clear about your boundaries, they can actually be really creative within those boundaries.
Yeah, definitely. And like you said, all kids are different, and there's no manual, there's no workbook.
Yeah, and I think that's another reason. I just thought there's too much risk here. I don't feel comfortable. I'm not going to do it.
Yeah, there you go. Maybe you should go there, Leyla. You can't put that in a Google Calendar, I'll tell you that now.
Yeah, how would I cope?
You'd be freaking out.
Spontaneity.
What do you mean you want to eat now? It's not 6 o'clock yet.
Oh no, I'd be one of those mums, wouldn't I? I'd be like, no, you can't eat yet. No, I don't know. I just,
Okay, so moving things forward, what skills do you still think you need to grow, master, or learn to become the next version of yourself?
Oh, that's a really lovely question. I think some of it is around how, well, there's like business skills. So there's things around online platforms and I guess around marketing. So how do I reach more of the people that I want to reach? For those skills. And then I think it's the other skills, I guess, linked to vulnerability, but also patient. I'm not a patient person. That's like, I wasn't born patient. So that's always a struggle for me. Patience. I'm okay at the perseverance. I'm okay at the persistence, but it's about the patience. I think also around acceptance, I'm not very good at accepting things, and I always think of that. I think it's Buddhist, the prayer that God grant me the serenity to change the things I can, to accept the things I can't, and the wisdom to know the difference. So I think it's also that wisdom to know the difference. I think about that prayer a lot, because I think that's really that's really a big one for me, to be for the best version of myself.
So, and in terms of success, I know, for me, success is a journey. It's not a destination. We're never going to reach a point where we say, I am successful. It's the way we build our lives. It's the way we shape ourselves. It's the environments we live in. It's the information that we surround ourselves. It's the noise we drown out. It's the noise we raise up, that create this cake that has a lot of ingredients called us. But if you had to sort of define success by a value, for me, it's not monetary anymore. There's so many other ways to define success. What would be probably your biggest metric?
I think it's kindness, I think it is kindness, and it's small things. And I remember at the beginning of lockdown, one of my neighbours knocked on my door. In fact, I'd just come off a really difficult conversation. I was really upset. And there was a knock on the door, and I opened the door, and he said, "You're okay. I haven't seen you for weeks. Are you all right? How are you?" And it was so strange, but so lovely. And just so kindness, like, that was a moment where I nearly burst into tears. But just, I think it is about kindness, isn't it? Like, there is that thing about, we are judged by our piety and our good deeds, and I think it is about good deeds, and I think it's about kindness. And we might not be able to go and save the world. That's another lesson I've had to learn, actually, that's been really hard as a teenager. You can't go out and save the world, but you can give someone a smile, you can help someone with a door, you can help someone with their shopping, you can say, I'll give you half an hour of my time, you can say, I'm going to donate some of my profits to charity. So I think that's actually what success is, and it goes back to that Maya Angelou quote: people might not remember what you said or what you did, but they'll remember how you made them feel.
Yes. And you're talking about the world and having the difficulty to understand that we can't, no matter how much we try, there's the impact that we're going to have on the whole world may be limited in our lifetime. But the difference we can make is to our world, right? It's the people around us, it's the things around us, it's the things that are close contact to us, and it's the way we can build our strength and our knowledge and our information to try and help them, so that we shine bright, shine our light and therefore they can shine their light because of being in our light as well, right? And I take a lot of solace in that, because like you said, you can get into a syndrome where you feel like you're not doing anything, there's no difference that you're making. But when you realize that just by having this conversation, the conversation between us today, I always have a little prayer that I do before I accept the guest on, to say, hopefully this conversation reaches all the people it needs to reach, whether that be one, that would be 10, whether that be 100, whatever it is, because that has then made my life worthwhile. All the experiences I've had, the downs and the ups, that if we can share this journey, because I feel the words have a power, they have a ripple effect that sort of ripple out. So not just, sometimes the conversation like this can be alien to a lot of people. And what I mean by that is, they don't have conversations like this. They don't have any more people around them to have conversations like this. And for me, I'm blessed. And that's why I started this, because there's so many people around me that I can have these conversations and really create a normality of speaking in this way, in this manner. But I know it's not real for a lot of people. So therefore, if I can then put this out to say, these are two regular people. There's Leyla and there's Bhavik. We are not Elon Musk and Bill Gates, etc. No, it's true. But we've lived a life in a certain way, and we've been surrounded by experience. We've been lucky to have a strong foundation beneath us that we can raise our voice, and we can then, bash these two things together and ripple out. So therefore, the people that are listening, to show that we're only probably 1 degree removed from you, anyone that's listening. So therefore, if we can then use that energy that we have within us to share and to, envelope the light that surrounds us, it can only help, and I have no fear of rejection. I have no fear of other people's opinion, because my opinion of myself is higher than anyone's opinion of me. So therefore, I know I can continue on this path and have almost like a shield that it doesn't affect me. If anyone has a negativity, I'll take it on, say thank you, and that's it. And that's as far as it'll go. And I'm sure you're very similar to that. I know you'll probably argue a lot more than I would. I'll just accept it.
Well, no, I don't know if I would. And actually, you saying that goes back to your last question, what do I need to work on? And I think it's that. I still got a very deep fear of rejection because of the stuff in the school playground. Because in the back, it's like, will I be excluded? Will I be accepted? It's gotten better. But I don't think I'm where you are yet, Bhavik. So that's quite inspirational for me to hear, because you're right. It's not, and if so, no one has to like you. And like you said, I have gotten much better at it, but it is about that. Thank you for your thoughts. Thank you. You're entitled to your opinion, and let's move on. I'll start dwelling and ruminating on it.
Why?
Yeah, why? Because I'll think, what have I done? Why have I upset them? Why? As much as I fight against being a people pleaser, there's still some kind of wiring that's happened there about people pleasing. So yeah, and I think that's one of the reasons I don't like to feel vulnerable. That's another pushback against that. So yeah, thank you for saying that, because I'll add that to my list.
There you go. We move forward somewhere, right? We move forward conversation. Right. So now, Leyla, just one thing. So just before we head towards the end of the conversation, I'd like to invite you on again. So what happens is that I'm building a studio right now, this at the shop. And when this sort of whole craziness sort of settles down, I want to do more of these one-to-one, in face-to-face. And I think there's such a energy and it's such an experience you have and so much information you have to share that I know we can carry on for hours and hours, and there's still so much more to share. But on this first, it was just more of an introduction and more of an insight into you and the way you live life. So thank you for that. So as we sort of move to the end of the conversation, 2 more questions I've got for you. And just give the viewers a little bit more of an insight into you and sort of the way you think, etc. Okay. So now what we've done, we reached the end of your days. You've lived 175 years and you're happy. You've done everything you want to do. You've changed all the people's views and opinions of things that matter to you. And now sort of you're sitting down or you're lying down and you don't have enough energy to speak, but you do have a pen and a paper and you're asked to write 3 words by the people around you. And these 3 words have sort of helped you in your life. They resonate with you. And they hopefully, by sharing them, it'll help the people that are around you to live their life in a sort of a little bit easier way. What would those 3 words be for you?
They would be reach your, in capitals, potential.
Hmm. And if you can go into that a little bit as well, please.
Yeah, because I think that everyone has different potentials, different
Hmm.
ways of doing things. There isn't one set way of doing things, but I think it's super important to do your best to reach your potential, whatever that is, so that you don't think I wasted my time, I wasted my life, I wasted moments. And that journey won't be easy, but I do think that that's what I would definitely
Yeah.
write down to help people.
And I think it's super important because you'll probably know this as well, or you'll see this as well. Is sometimes you see a potential in someone that they don't see in themselves, right? And I know, Versh's always saying stuff to me, I'm saying stuff to her, and then there's people around me that I'm saying things to, because I can see so much in someone or the capability, they believe. Sometimes they just don't have it in themselves, right? And it's only when we speak and we use our words with each other that we can maybe get someone on a path that maybe they didn't believe is possible for themselves, right? And I know people say things to me that I'm like, I'm not sure. And they're like, you can definitely do that. I can see that. And they can see it before you, right? And that potential is huge when you have the right support system around you, when you have the right, rocket backpack that's fired up by the people that actually tell you this is possible and we've got your back, and we'll be your safety net. You just walk along that tightrope and we'll catch you if you fall. And when you have that kind of energy around you, it can only be greatness that's achieved, right? But it's only when we share our thoughts and our feelings with those around us and try and help in that way that so much more can happen, right? And I even like having conversation with you, ladies. First conversation I've had with you in this respect, but there's so much knowledge that you have, and I can see there's so much more still to go. There's a long life still ahead there, and I know you're on that path, and I can see that you feel constrained and you feel restricted as it is, and there's so much growth that you still want to go, and there's so much still that you want to share, and I know it will happen. Like you said, the one thing you need is patience. It will happen. Just stay on the path and keep surrounding yourself with the right information, the right conversations, the right people, and that will keep moving you forward. And I know it will. Okay. So on the sort of the last thing now. So this podcast is called Bigger Than the Hustle, and right now you're bigger than the world. So we're going to open up this mic to the whole world. That's 7.58 billion people, and they can all hear you. They can understand what you're saying. There's no language barrier. Everyone's awake and conscious, and they're ready to hear what you've got to say. So if I've given you this mic for 30 seconds, what would your message be to the world?
I think it would be, please look after each other, please be kind, and please remember that what good you do comes back to you, what bad you do comes back to you.
And that's the karmic effect of this universe, right? We may not see it with our 5 senses, but we feel it with our 6th and 7th senses, right? And it's so important that we understand that everything we do, every action has an equal and opposite reaction, right? And understanding that any service, any energy that leaves us with the right intention will always come back double. And if it's left with a good intention, no matter what anyone else does with it, that's not our core to understand and work out. It's like when someone says you give money to charity, how do you know that money is going to where it's meant to? It's not your job to know that. It's your job to give it with the right intention. And if it's not meant to go where it's meant to go, it will come back to you. And if it does, it will go to where it needs to go. And that's it. And, we can live our lives like that. So at this point, Leyla, I'd really like to thank you.
No,
thank you for being a guest. Thank you for getting me on your Google Calendar. I know it's a busy calendar, so it's taking
color coded, of course.
Yeah. So just before we go, is there how can people connect with you if they want to sort of get in touch or understand more about you?
Sure. So I've got my website, which is diverseminds.co.uk. So you can have a look there. I'm also on LinkedIn, Leyla Okhai, and on Twitter, my handle is @diversemindsuk. And I'm on Facebook. I've got a Facebook page, which is Diverse Minds UK, and I've also got a Wellbeing 365 group, and that's a group where people just share wellbeing tips. We're helping each other. I started it at the beginning of the pandemic, so if you type in Wellbeing 365, or you can find it from the Diverse Minds Facebook page. And yes, and also, Bhavik, just if anyone did want to book in free 30-minute coaching sessions with me, you can do so via my website, or you can do so on my Calendly. So it's Calendly, calendly.com/Leyla, spelt Leyla, and then O. And you'll find it on there. So you can book a free call if you want to talk about work-life balance challenges, or maybe people want to pick up on some of the things we've talked about here.
Perfect. And I'll hook it up on all the show notes. So however you're watching this, you're listening to this, it'll be in the show notes. You can click on there and it'll take you straight to Leyla's page. And please, if anything has resonated, please do get in touch. Leyla knows her stuff. She's got a lot of information. She spent a lot of her life doing this and learning this. And a lot of it's been learned through life as opposed to through books. So, get in touch. Like I said, you can only... If you want to improve the quality of your life, you need to improve the quality of your decisions, and you can only improve the quality of the decision by improving the knowledge you get to make those decisions. So having conversations with people like Leyla will improve the knowledge, which improves the decisions, which improves the quality of your life. So please use that. So at this junction, Leyla, I'd like to say thank you.
Thank you so much.
I'm sure we're going to do this again, so don't worry. And I'm sure there's so much more to share and there's so much more to go. So thank you for that. Okay, guys, so this was Bigger Than the Hustle podcast, and I'd like to thank you again for listening. Hope something resonated with you. Hope something, clicked with you, and it will help you in life in some little way. And if it does, it's been worth it. So just a quick thought to leave you with. Big energy leads to big thoughts lead to big ideas lead to big actions, and big actions lead to a big life. So keep thinking big. Until next time, thanks for listening. Goodbye.
The guy who took your 10 grand and earned 10% on it every year for 60 years will give you back 3 million after 60 years. Not bad, right?
Yeah.
10,000 to 3 million, right? The Warren Buffett, who can invest it at 20%, will give you back 563 million.